It's been years of routine stability and comfort, but somewhere along the line it started feeling hollow. John and I have been married for 12 years, and he's successful, careful, and runs his own business. He spends more time at the office than at home, and I can honestly recall the last time we spent a weekend together doing anything impromptu. It's not that I'm unhappy. The washing machine fills the house with silence. I lean against the countertop and watch the bubbles through the glass. But for the longest time, I've been unable to comprehend the growing emptiness that consumes me. I have everything I need, including a lovely home, a husband who provides for me, and a stable life, but it feels stagnant, like a once thriving garden slowly turning brown. Every morning, I watch him get dressed in his typical suit, his eyes fixed on his phone while he drinks coffee. I try to tell him about my day, but he nods absently and only partially listens, and I begin to feel like a piece of furniture that he values. There isn't a single moment that made me feel invisible, but one day I realized that I couldn't remember the last time he'd really looked at me. Then, one of those rare evenings when I went out alone, John was working late again, and it was a friend's house. It's funny that you don't wake up one day and decide to drift apart. Instead, it happened gradually, like the ocean removing grains of sand until the beach looks different, but you can't pinpoint when it changed. I went to a downtown bar on my birthday to break the monotony because the energy there was buzzing, and it was a huge contrast to the quiet house I had left behind. I was drinking a glass of red wine while listening to my friends talk about their new jobs, vacations, and their kids' antics. It made me laugh, but it also made me realize how little I laugh these days. That's when I noticed him sitting a few stools down from me. He was a tough leather jacket-wearing biker with a scruffy beard and eyes that seemed to see everything. JN was methodical and measured, but Alex was spontaneous and unpredictable. He had an easy, confident charm, and he looked at me like I was the most interesting person in the world. We talked about music, travel, and nothing else for what seemed like hours. For a brief moment though, something inside of me ignited, and I felt the thrill of being truly noticed for the first time in ages. I can't remember who moved first, whether it was him or me. When he laughed, it wasn't polite or restrained. It was real and it made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. When the night ended, he asked for my number, and I hesitated, but then I thought about returning to that quiet house and that half of their marriage. I gave him my number, telling myself it was harmless, just a little thrill to shake up my life because everyone needs a friend, right? I didn't expect to hear from him so soon, but the relationship was special. A message was waiting for me the following morning. I had a great time last night and would love to see you again sometime. As I read it, I felt a little guilty. I told myself that it had just been a fun one-time thing and that I would politely decline, but before I knew it, I was typing back, maybe when I have some free time. Thank you for last night. The days passed and I didn't hear from him again, so I told myself that it was fortunate that I had avoided a bullet, but I couldn't help but feel let down because I kept replaying that night in my head. A week later, I found myself back in the same bar, telling myself it was just a coincidence that I was out to meet friends, but they didn't show up, and there was Alex waiting at the bar, a grin spreading across his face when he saw me. I realized then that I was lying to myself. This wasn't a coincidence, this was something I've been craving, and we started talking as easily as the first time, and before I knew it, I was laughing. It's funny how someone you hardly know can make you feel more alive than someone you've loved for years. After a few drinks, he offered to drive me home on his bike, and before I knew it, I was nodding. The rush of the wind as we raced through the deserted streets was thrilling, filling the void inside of me with something electric. When we arrived at my street, I knew I should go inside and resume my normal life, but I lingered. He looked at me, his eyes holding a quiet intensity that I felt in my bones, and then I leaned without thinking. I leaned in and kissed him, hesitantly at first, as if to test the limits, but he pulled me in, and the kiss deepened, sending a wave of heat through me. I hadn't experienced that kind of passion in years, and for a moment, I didn't care about the consequences. When we parted ways, he gave me a knowing smile, and I nodded, hardly believing my voice to respond. As I watched him ride away, I felt guilty, but there was also a sense of excitement and anticipation that I hadn't felt in years. As the days went by, I went about my routine, but everything felt a little different, like there was a secret pulse beneath the surface. I couldn't get rid of the memory of that kiss, the thrill of being noticed, and the risk-taking. It was like a ripple that spread through the rest of my life. I felt guilty and excited at the same time that night as I slipped into bed next to John, who was sound asleep. I stared at the ceiling. While John's life remained the same, I would catch myself smiling without any apparent reason as I daydreamed about that night with Alex. He would leave early for work, barely noticing me as he hurried out the door, always on his phone, juggling some new project or deal. I would watch him lose all focus and wonder if he would notice if I simply vanished. We were like courteous strangers moving around each other with practiced ease, rarely discussing anything other than logistics and schedules, and perhaps that was my fault. On Friday night, when John called me again to let me know he would be home late, I found myself reaching for my phone without intending to, but my fingers were already typing out a message to Alex, who was still around tonight. The message sat there unread as I wondered what I was doing, because I wasn't the type of woman who texted another man behind her husband's back. I had also stopped trying, accepting that this was just the way things were in a long marriage. I arrived at the bar feeling a mixture of excitement and nerves, a little thrill that brought back memories of my 20s. I immediately spotted him relaxing at the bar with his jacket slung over the chair, and his face lit up when he saw me. The message on my phone said, "Drop by if you want." It was a simple and unassuming invitation, but it sent a shiver through me. I told myself it would only be a drink, just a chance to feel like myself again, someone interesting and desirable, someone not bound to a life she'd long since outgrown. I guess I'm good company after all. He smirked and slid a drink over to me, saying, and that spark I'd felt the last time was still there, as though nothing in the world mattered except this moment back again. We struck up a casual conversation. Alex had a way of making everything feel like an adventure. He wasn't like John or any of the men I knew. He had a roughness and unpredictability that drew me in. He talked about the road, his bike, his friends, and the freedom to leave. I envied his carefree attitude toward life, and he said, "You should come with us." His eyes glinted with that mischievous spark, and I laughed, shaking my head. At one point, the conversation took a different turn, and he told me about a trip he was planning with some friends, including riding through the desert to a music festival. It was a dusty, lawless type of place where everyone was welcome as long as they could handle themselves. The more I considered it, the less I wanted to return to that quiet house and resume my role as the obedient wife. After a few more drinks, we found ourselves strolling outside in the dim glow of the streetlights. It was late and the streets were deserted. Harley's words stayed with me, taunting me with their possibility of live a little. It was wrong to break the rules just one night to feel like someone else entirely. He asked, nodding towards his bike, and I hesitated, looking around as if someone might see us, but there was no one, just the two of us, and the quiet hum of the night. I didn't answer, so I just walked over to his bike and swung a leg over the seat. He smiled, climbing on in front of me, and in a matter of seconds we were tearing down the road, the wind whipping past us, the city blurring around us with neon. We rode for what seemed like hours, speeding down empty roads cutting through quiet neighborhoods, until he finally pulled over by an old garage on the outskirts of town. It was his, and he explained a place where he worked on bikes with a few people. The lights were casting strange shifting colors across the road, and I clung to him, feeling the heat of his body against mine. For the first time in so long, I felt a surge of joy that was wild, untamed, and completely out of control. He joked, pointing to a beaten couch pressed against the wall, and before I knew it, we were kissing again. This time, there was nothing hesitant about it, and I was craving that thrill his hands were giving me. Friends, the place had a rough charm, cluttered with tools, grease-stained rags, and a strong smell of gasoline. It was nothing like the clean, pristine life I was used to, but it felt real raw in a way I hadn't experienced in years. The sun was rising when he dropped me back at my car. It was reckless and impulsive, and it made me feel more alive than I had in years. His kiss was demanding and rough against my skin, and for the first time I let go completely. There was no holding back, no careful thought, just raw emotion and need. We spent the night together hidden away in that gritty garage, surrounded by the remnants of his life tools, spare bike parts, and the faint scent of engine oil. And a strange mix of emotions came up inside me as I drove home. Guilt was there, creeping in at the edges, but I forced it down, telling myself that it had only been one night, a one-time escape from reality, and that I would return to my life with John and everything would be normal. However, I knew deep down that it wasn't that easy. I got home late that night, still feeling the excitement of my time with Alex, and as I turned the key in the lock, I was reliving the rush of our last kiss and the adrenaline rush of living recklessly. John was sitting on the couch with his face illuminated in the cold, merciless light of his laptop. He looked up when I walked in, his eyes piercing through me with a gaze so sharp it stopped me dead in my tracks. I told myself that this would be my last taste of freedom before I refocused on my marriage, worked things out, or at least tried to feel satisfied again. However, as soon as I walked into the house, I knew something was wrong. The air felt charged, tense, and heavy. His eyes had something in them that I had never seen before, but his face was pale, almost ghostly. He pressed a button on his laptop, and the screen turned to face me. I was horrified to see that I was locked in an embrace with Alex outside that dilapidated garage. He must have followed me and caught me without my knowledge. I felt sick, and the room seemed to tilt toward me as reality set in. "You didn't even see me standing there, did you?" His voice was cold and shaky. Familiarity, I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. What could I say to improve this situation? He slowly got up, the laptop still playing the incriminating video, and I stammered, reaching for him, but he stepped back, recoiling from me as if I were something poisonous. "It wasn't like that." I finally managed to speak in a whisper. "John, please. It's been difficult. You've been so aloof at work and I felt like I was." He repeated, his voice cold and bitter, and he gestured around the house, saying, "I'm here every day working my ass off so you have everything, and you went behind my back, threw it all away for him, my excuses." The words felt desperate and rushed, but they were the truth, and I couldn't stop them from spilling out in the hopes that they would explain what I couldn't even understand myself. "I was lonely, John, and you don't even see me anymore." His face was twisted with a mixture of anger and disbelief. Felt weak and hollow in the face of his pain, so I tried to reach out again, but he shook his head, his hands clenched tightly at his sides, and he said, "Don't." His voice was shaking, and in the last of my remaining composure, I fell to my knees and begged him, my voice full of tears, "John, I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to go this far." He interrupted me, his tone cold and resolute, and he looked down at me, his eyes. I tried to explain to him how alone I had felt and how his absence had left a void I hadn't known how to feel, but every apology and justification only seemed to serve to increase his rage. "You have no idea what it's like to choke out, to feel like you're disappearing, like no one sees you. I don't know who you are anymore." I felt the walls closing with every word he spoke, driving the reality of my betrayal deeper into me. His voice trembling, he said, "If you were unhappy, you should have talked to me. You should have left anything but this." He shook his head in disgust and pointed to the laptop where the video was playing in an endless damning loop. I was silent as I realized that no explanation or apology could undo what I had done. The betrayal was exposed between us, creating a chasm that I could never bridge. As I knelt there, broken and defeated, I realized that I had destroyed the only thing that was solid in my life. I tried one last time to reach out to him, but all he did was stare down at me, his expression hardening, his voice deadened by resignation, and he said, "You already lost me the second you made that choice. Life, pack your things," he said finally, his voice a whisper. "You can't stay here." The finality of his words settled over me like a shroud, cutting through me like a blade. "John, please, I don't want to lose you." Clarity. I had gambled with our marriage and everything we had built together, and I had lost it all in a moment of reckless abandonment. The weight of that realization crushed me, filling me with a bitter, suffocating shame. I slowly got up, feeling numb, and walked to the bedroom, the room we had shared for years. I looked around at every item and piece of furniture, each one a painful reminder of the life we had created, now reduced to a hollow shell. I packed my belongings in silence, crying. I tried one last time, my voice breaking as I whispered, "I'm so sorry, John," but he didn't respond, didn't even look at me, and his silence was louder than any words, a condemnation I would carry with me for the rest of my life. As I folded the clothes he had bought me, the gifts he had given me over the years, each item felt like a betrayal, a tangible reminder of everything I had thrown away. He stood by the doorway, arms crossed, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond me. I sat in the lawyer's office, numb, listening to every detail of the divorce settlement, every term like a nail driving deeper into the hollow ache in my chest. The lawyer was kind, professional, and even compassionate in that detached way professionals have when they see people falling apart in front of them. I nodded mechanically to every point, barely able to focus, and I had agreed to everything without question because it felt like the least I could do after. One part of me wanted to reach across the table and touch his hand one last time to tell him how deeply sorry I was and how much I wished I could go back and choose differently. But I knew the bridge was long burned and he was letting me go as if I were a piece of clothing he'd simply put away. John sat across the table, his face expressionless and cold, as though he had become a stranger overnight. I kept my eyes on my hands, not daring to look up and see his disappointment and hurt. My mother's house had been my home once, a place of warmth and comfort, but returning here at the age of 36 felt more like a defeat than a homecoming. The walls seemed smaller, pressing in on me as though I were an intruder in my own life. She welcomed me, of course, her face full of concern and pity as she wrapped her arms around me, but her kindness only made it worse. I felt stripped bare, humiliated, and most of all, so terribly undeniably alone. The drive there felt endless. The thrill that had drawn me to Alex felt so pointless now, a cheap thrill that left nothing but an ache in my chest and a hollow I couldn't feel. I tried to call him the night I left John's house, desperate for some comfort, some reassurance that this was all somehow worth it, that I hadn't thrown everything away for nothing, but he hadn't even replied to my call. It was a painful reminder of everything I'd shattered of the home and life I'd torn apart in the quiet of my mother's spare room. As I adapted to this new reality, each morning felt like a struggle to get out of bed to face the emptiness of a life I'd torn apart with my own hands. I missed John, the home we'd built together, the warmth of our shared life, the stability, the comfort, the way he used to smile at me in the early mornings, his soft eyes. He vanished, leaving me with nothing but the faint echo of laughter and the thrill that had once felt like freedom but now felt more like a trap I'd voluntarily fallen into. With a love that I had taken for granted, but now all I had was the memory of his heartbroken face and the silent, unforgiving resignation in his eyes as he told me to leave. My mother tried to lift my spirits by suggesting that I enroll in a class or get a new job to keep me busy, but everything seemed pointless and trivial in comparison to what I had lost. The rush and excitement I had experienced with Alex had disappeared, leaving only the bitter taste of regret. I had chased after something that had seemed novel and exciting, but it had only served to shatter everything I had once treasured. I even spent hours and days thinking back on how I had arrived at this point, trying to comprehend the emptiness that had led me to seek comfort in the arms of a man who didn't care for me. Perhaps it had been the years of feeling invisible, the quiet pain of a marriage that had turned into a routine rather than a romantic one, but the truth was that I had chosen this path. I could have fought for JN for us, trying harder to rekindle what we'd lost, but instead I'd taken the easy way out, chasing after a spark that had only. Sitting by myself in that spare room, I realized how foolish I had been and how much I had allowed my own dissatisfaction to blind me to the love I'd once shared with JN. The thrill of excitement and feeling wanted had been a mirage, and now all I had left was the painful reality of a life in which I'd thrown away the memory of John's love, something I'd never feel again. I traded a lifetime of security and warmth for a brief moment of passion, and now that it was gone, all I had left was regret and the never-ending haunting image of his. I'm not sure where to go from here. Some nights, I lay awake in my mother's house, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'll ever be able to move on, if the pain of what I've done will ever go away. I know I have to rebuild, find a way to live with the choices I've made, but for now, the future feels as empty as my heart, a vast, unforgiving landscape that I don't know how to navigate. All I have left is the knowledge that I've held love in my hands once, real love, and I've let it slip away. The most agonizing conclusion of all was that I had everything I needed and everything I had ever desired, but I had chosen to walk away because I was lost in a misdirected chase of something I didn't even understand. Created by Glasswith.